Wife devotion. It's D, I have to take this, she said in an apologetic tone. We had a loose circle of 5 couples that we met up with from time to time. We were closest to Dee and her husband Dave. She and Linda were best friends. Linda answered the phone with an "I won't be long" gesture. I could see Linda getting more and more excited talking to Dee. She was almost glowing when she ended the conversation and plopped into my lap. What if we all get together, get babysitters for the kids, have a proper dinner, dance at a nice club, and then get hotel rooms? That way we could get a little crazy and not worry about going home, and we'd end this horrible month right. I'll have to think about that. I didn't really know, but I was hoping that if I hesitated, Linda would use one of her patented, guaranteed successful female persuasion techniques to convince me. Instead, she grabbed a couch cushion and hit me over the head with it. Ow. Okay, I've been thinking. Let's do this. But there's one condition. What's that? Linda looked at me suspiciously. I took her pretty face in the palm of my hand and looked into her blue eyes. You're going to wear the dress you bought for Valentine's Day, but I haven't seen it yet. The 10 of us met at the restaurant. It was crowded on a Friday night, but we had reserved a table large enough for all 10 of us to eat together. We laughed, chatted, and enjoyed a great meal, happy in each other's company and glad that February was finally coming to an end. Linda was the most attractive woman in the restaurant, and I must have told her that half a dozen times. I touched her arm, shoulder, or hand as often as I could find a reasonable reason to. She would respond in kind and smile as she looked into my eyes. This was going to be an unforgettable night. The evening was going well, and we were all enjoying ourselves. We kept our wives on the dance floor for as long as they wanted, each of us trying to outdo the others with our grace, and as good manners dictate, we also danced with each other's wives. There is nothing inappropriate about this. In fact, quite the opposite is what polite people do. There was no jealousy, no leering, no gushing. While the 10 of us were relaxing, drinking water and nibbling on treats, Dave looked around the room in amazement. Isn't that Marc Lavaliere? Who's Marc Lavaliere? He plays for the local soccer team. What's soccer? Okay, that was said in jest, and we all laughed. We weren't the big sports type. Some of us play golf, softball, or even a little tennis in the summer and embarrass ourselves on the basketball court in the winter, but we did it for the social aspects and exercise, not to imagine ourselves as some athletic superstars of an alternate universe. We were more likely to attend a Stephen Hawking lecture than sit for 2 hours watching millionaire athletes play ball. At this point, this discussion closed and we continued our conversation. Dee and I sat closest to the dance floor. Dee across from me, Dave to her right, and Linda to her left. I didn't have much interest in what was going on behind me, since everyone who mattered to me that night was sitting at the same table as me. I glanced at Dee, who had an expression of surprise and curiosity on her face. Don't turn around, but I think Lavaliere is coming our way. Well, you know what happens when someone says something like that. Everyone on the far side looked up, and the others who were standing with their backs to Lavaliere turned around to see what was going on. I think you're right. Do you think he wants our table? What can I say? We all suffered in high school, and we all recognized a bully when we saw one. Lavaliere walked over to our table and, looking past me as if I wasn't there, raised his hand, almost hitting my nose, and said to Linda, "Would you like to dance?" I've known Linda since college, and we have no secrets. That's good because we can read each other like a book, and what I saw on her face at that moment was amusement mixed with a little bit of annoyance. It was almost as if she had said, "What insolence!" I felt Linda squeeze my hand under the table, and with a smile on her face, she said, "You'll have to ask my husband's permission." Lavaliere didn't like that. He wasn't used to being put on the spot. He looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as a condescending grin and said, "Would you mind if I danced with your wife?" I knew the man well, though I had never met him before. I know the type. He was used to getting his own way and not asking permission from those he thought were beneath him. I toyed with the idea of telling him, "Yes, I object," but that would have given him too much pleasure. For someone like Lavaliere, it would have been an admission of fear and intimidation. Besides, I'm not in the habit of telling my wife what she can and can't do. The choice is hers. There was an expression of arrogant victory on his face, and without repeating his request, he simply tilted his head to the side, raised his eyebrows, and extended his hand further in Linda's direction. She squeezed my hand once more under the table, stood up, and walked out onto the dance floor with Lavaliere. I almost felt sorry for the asshole. She was out of his league, and he didn't even realize it. At this point, I need to tell you a little bit about Linda, myself, and our friends. First, if I ever suggested to Linda that she try something like an open marriage or a swap or some other nonsense, her answer would be quick and clear. Then, after a few minutes, when the extraordinary pain between my legs has abated, I will get up off the floor, sit down, and calmly explain. I like that about my wife. Infidelity offends her, and I never worry about her behavior. Second, my wife and I and our friends are ridiculously educated. This is not an insult to anyone. It just explains who we are. We set goals for ourselves and want to do something challenging with our lives. That means more than the usual amount of schooling. We're not snobs, and we have a lot of friends with different professions. We choose our friends based on their character rather than their classes, and we have pretty high standards. As for ourselves, we're not the type to follow the whims of pop culture or lose our heads to the influence of the crowd. Lavaliere kept Linda on the dance floor first in a fast set, then in a slow set. I admit I was a little annoyed, but I figured he had invited her to his table to introduce her to other famous athletes. It would be an interesting experience that she could tell our parents and siblings about, so I was content to wait. At the end of the slow set, Lavaliere led Linda back to our table, putting his arm around her waist and smiling. Linda looked at me with the same expression of surprise and annoyance and said to me, "Jim, Mark asked me to go home with him tonight. He promised me the most incredible sex of my life, much better than you can offer me. I told him I needed your permission before I could go out with him." There was a playful, almost mischievous glee in her eyes, and I knew she could barely contain her mirth. I had more success than my wife, suppressing my amusement at the sight of this arrogant, highly paid athlete. "I'm sorry, dear, but this is unacceptable." "Oh, fluff. You never let me have any fun." With those words, she slipped away from a startled and very embarrassed Mark Lavaliere and sat down next to me. She was tired of playing with him. His confusion didn't last long. Lavaliere looked at me angrily and said, "Listen, Cook, this fool is coming home with me tonight, so get used to it." He really shouldn't have used that word. It might explain what happened next. I raised my hand to get his attention. "Mark, can I call you Mark?" "Mark, you need to understand something about the women at this table and their husbands. There are 10 of us, 5 engineers, 2 professors, 2 doctors, and a lawyer. You really don't represent anything special to us, so just go away and try to impress another man's wife. You failed with mine." Lavaliere didn't like it. I think it brought him back to his school days and all those remedial classes. I have to say that for a man who makes his living on his feet, where he has to be aware of everything going on around him, his focus on me made him remarkably unaware of what was going on at the table. While I was trying to explain everything to Lavaliere, Dee discreetly slipped her hand into her purse. When Lavaliere growled, "Look, Cook!" and reached for my collar to put pressure on it, he suddenly let out a "ee!" and fell to the floor in spasms of uncontrollable muscle contractions. Dee shot him in the groin with her stun gun. Just like that, she was sitting right in front of him. She could hardly have missed. We all leaned over and looked down at him while he convulsed. Those of us closest to him stayed in our seats while those farther away had to stand up. He didn't seem to be very comfortable. That suit needs dry cleaning. Eventually, he pulled himself together and, breathing heavily, got up off the floor. He reached for me again and screamed, "You asshole! I'm going to—" He never finished his threat, nor did he see the wires pressing against his groin. Dee hit him again, and he fell to the floor again, squirming in convulsions. As we watched, Lavalier humiliated himself even more. "Oh, no. Ee. Oh, that's disgusting." I raised my hand to get the bar's attention. "Clean up in aisle 6. Well, you can't hit a person with a stun gun in a crowded room, let alone a sports star, without attracting attention, and besides, the smell was already starting to reach the neighboring tables. Lavalier's friends were quickly approaching us. They made it to our little group, and at least one of them managed to get a glimpse of the stun gun wires at Lavalier's groin. "What did you do to him?" "Did you?" I thought. "You can see the taser, right?" And yet I kept those thoughts to myself. "You can't do this to any of us." And as they approached us, Dee and the other women pulled their tasers out from under the table. Now the situation was getting interesting. 4 enraged athletes were looking at the working end of 5 stun guns, and their friend was lying on the floor, soiled. We let them stand there for what seemed like a very long time, hoping they could come to the obvious conclusion without our help. They didn't, but I assume they noticed the growing crowd of gawkers gathered around us and the bouncers who were busily evaluating their own muscles against those of their competitors. "Why don't you take your friend back to the table and pour him a cold beer?" This elicited giggles from the ladies. After a few more fierce looks and indecision, they decided to back off. As we watched the top 4 frogs on our team take their friend to the men's room, apparently to let him clean up, Linda said, "Boys and girls, I don't want to spoil the evening, but I'm not sure they're ready to leave this issue. What do you say we go out and have a coffee and maybe a couple of sweets on the way?" Without arguing, we signed the bills and gathered our things. As we left the club, I couldn't help but praise Linda for her play. "You know it's all your fault, don't you?" "How is it my fault?" "Okay," she smirked and was a little too proud of herself when she said that. "You're just so damn irresistible." I pulled her closer to me, and that gave me a loving kiss on the cheek with the promise of more. Soon we forgot about Marc Lavalier and his friends. I'd love to tell you that Lavalier never learned his lesson until a bullet fired by an angry husband went through his knee, ending his soccer career. But the truth is better. As I've said before, you can't hit a man with a stun gun in a crowded room, let alone a sports star, without attracting attention. At least a dozen cell phone videos of Marc Lavalier lying on the ground, squirming convulsively and getting dirty, quickly flew around our city. The local news carried the story, albeit with significant editing of the content. It seems that his treatment of my wife, as well as others, was well known in town, and that part of the story was told, although Linda's name was omitted. The local hunting store began selling stun guns under the name Special for Marc Lavalier and sold successfully. Whenever Lavalier and his friends entered a bar or restaurant and he started to approach some man's wife, someone would inevitably pull his stun gun out of his jacket or purse so he could see it. It wasn't so much a threat as a humiliation, and he soon stopped his offensive behavior. His play dropped, and he was traded to a town where his off-field history was less well known. As for Linda and I and our friends, life is good. Our love is strong, and our kids are growing up fast. When you have a partner you can trust, Marc Lavalier is no threat to your marriage. They will swagger, show off to the crowd, make threats, and play their games, but in the end they will go home alone unless they find a less worthy partner. Have pity on them. They are empty, hollow people, almost worthless, and deep down they know it. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.